The Alldus podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe.
Hello everybody, it is Mark Kelly. I hope you're doing really well today. We have got our Alldus podcast today, and I'm very happy to welcome Craig Ramsay. And Craig is a senior solution architect at Omada, and we are going to be talking about identity governance and mixed in with a bit some cyber strategies as well. And we're going to try to keep this conversation nice and tight, but we might meander a little bit because there's so much good content in this session. I had the pleasure of speaking to Craig before today, and we were doing some preparation beforehand, and we were talking about how we could go into a variety of different strategies. But what we wanted to do is give you the most value that we possibly could do in less than 20 minutes. And Craig is here to talk a little bit more about identity governance and some of these strategies that we can put into place. Craig, thanks again for joining us on the show.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Craig, you've got a really interesting background, and it's definitely a unique background. And I think it's kind of one that naturally gravitates to the work that you now do, but I don't think it was necessarily planned out that way. But Craig, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you come into this world and how you got into that role with Omada?
Yeah, sure. So initially, I was studying computer science and graduated from there. I got a job in an operational IT graduate scheme. By pure chance, there was an IAM project. So, I mean, it wasn't a cybersecurity function at that point. It was an operational IT project. I started working there for the first few years, but then took a bit of a left turn, decided to join the Police Scotland for 3 years. It was certainly different. I gained some experience from it, but after that 3-year period, I thought, no, I want to go back and see what's happening in the identity space. And then since then, it's just kind of kicked on. As I said, it's went from operational IT to being a core cybersecurity function. But yeah, not the traditional route.
Yeah, and I genuinely, anyone that I talk to, I've been doing this 17 years in the world of tech, they would always go through more of a kind of a more linear sequential. But I think the one where you went and you were doing that kind of public service and working in the world of security, and you dealing with so many different types of people, because crime doesn't determine if your level of where you are and standing from a societal perspective. So you must have gained a lot of confidence in terms of who you were interacting with, because you would have had to probably deliver some horrendous news to people. So how you're engaging with customers day to day in terms of what you're doing must be a lot more straightforward in some ways.
100%. I mean, I'm going to keep it quite light. There are some stories I could tell, but that's probably an entirely different podcast. But you're right. You're only dealing with good people when bad things happen to them in the police, and you need to try and communicate across a whole range of topics. And you're right. I think that confidence to communicate clearly to people at any level and adapt how I'm communicating, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways and transferable skills that I took from that and what I've taken into my role since then, I would say, for sure.
Yeah, because and I think we're going to go into more detail now. Sometimes people can kind of be concerned about talking to a customer and telling them about some of the challenges and blind spots and impact of some of their decisions, because they sometimes want to kind of appease the customer and manage through that. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about Omada. What's Omada's remit? Who does it serve? And tell us a little bit about what your role is within that.
Sure. So Omada are a cloud native identity governance provider. Our SaaS product, Omada Identity, is a market leader in identity governance space. We've been doing it since 2000, so we have been around for a long time, headquartered out of Copenhagen, and we're invested in by CVC Capital and Grow Capital. Those guys, since their investment, have really helped us on that cloud journey and growing to being the enterprise grade organization that we now are. In terms of who we serve people across all verticals, from financial services to manufacturing, retail, education. I mean, ultimately, identity touches everything, and we're probably going to come to that. Whether it's the fact that you're a highly regulated industry, or whether it's the fact that you've got a huge amount of identities and systems that you need to manage, and different types of identities, that's kind of where we help. where our sweet spot is the sort of mid to large organizations with complexity, because of the vast experience that we have in that space. In terms of what I do, I am a senior solution architect aligned with pre-sales, but I think the beauty of what I've found in the nearly 4 years that I've been at Omada is, whilst that does have me primarily aligned with supporting the sales process from a technical perspective, it's not just responding to RFIs, RFPs, doing demos, doing proof of concepts. We're getting involved early in the process now to actually develop solutions for our prospects and our customers. We're helping them build out their business case, which can be quite complex. We hear a lot that cyber is a number 1 or top 3, top 5 priority for organizations, but often what we hear and what we see isn't reflected sometimes with the investment that people are being able to get. But beyond that as well, they promote me to do things like this, to promote identity in the wider industry. There's different conferences. I was speaking to you before we're on this call here. I was at the Scots Secure event in Edinburgh yesterday. Not an event we were sponsoring, but again, they push me to keep up with trends in the industry. But I mean, that's kind of what my role is. A regular day, it can vary day to day, but that at a high level is kind of what I do.
So let's delve into a little bit more about this. And so if we go into that kind of identity conversation, and for companies listening in, and they could probably, when they think of cyber, they can probably think of more the kind of standard things that would pop up. When you're explaining this to a customer about the challenges or the importance of this, how are you getting their attention? Because as you mentioned, we've got AI conversations, you've got so many different applications, use cases. People are just digitally distracted. There's fear of missing out on so many different areas. But ultimately, you want to grab their attention, but you want to be working on things that make an impact to them and their bottom line. How do you get their attention, and how do you take them on the journey that they're actually see the effort is willing to put in?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think identity is becoming more and more important within the wider cyber conversation. I mean, I touched earlier, it was born out of operational IT requirements. So it used to be seen as quite a technical and efficiency-driven problem or process. But I think now it's an integral part, if not a central part. We went beyond identity being the new perimeter and identity being the ultimate control plane of cyber risk. But then I think when we're talking about cyber risk is business risk. And I think that's something that we as an industry need to get better at. And it's making sure that organizations understand that the risks that we help mitigate with strong identity governance, helping things like zero trust, actually help mitigate core business risks. So, we can talk about feature, function, technical aspects of what we do, but I think we need to align that. And this is how we grab their attention by, what does a bad day look like for you at that, that senior level? What core systems, if you had no access to them, what would happen to the organization? What would happen to the revenue and reputation of the organization? How long will you be down for? How do you recover the minimum viable company? And that's the recovery part of it, your sort of continuity. But how do you make sure that you've got strong controls in place to prevent that from happening? And that's where the identity governance piece comes in, that we're helping mitigate risks around identity lifecycle. We're helping reduce the attack surface in organizations. And what that means is that the access to these critical systems is appropriate. It's to the principle of least privilege. And you're able to then quantify that risk of, you've spent this much money on an identity governance solution, it's mitigated these risks that if this risk was to happen, would have this impact to the organization. And that's how you grab their attention, I think, at that level.
And that's a wonderful thing, because as much as with other applications, there's a net promoter score, you're getting the gut feel feedback, having some tangible return on investment that you can speak to the CFO and liaise with the CEO to say, listen, this is something tangible we can work to. That's their language, right? That's the language that they respond to. So let's get into the weeds a little bit more. And you've given some lovely opportunities from different branches there. Is there any case studies, and again, you don't need to name the customer, but where you took them through a problem overcame some of the challenges with the solution and some of the impact that they have. So for anyone listening in, they can actually see that coming to life.
Yeah, sure. And I'll just touch on one part. You mentioned about NPS scores there in terms of that almost becomes why Omada, not why identity governance. So that's the second part of the conversation. If you've not got them bought in about why they want to do something and why they want to modernize identity governance in the first place, the NPS stuff and the why us as a vendor is completely secondary. But to bring it to the question you asked about sort of success stories, we do have multiple case studies on omadaidentity.com, but I won't name names whilst I'm talking just now. But of course, people can feel free to check those out. But if I think about two of the main ones, because the main drivers from well-driven identity governance, so the main benefits are stronger compliance, stronger security, and increased efficiency and productivity. If I take that last one, because often cyber is always about risk and it's fear, uncertainty, and doubt that we sell on, but from an efficiency, productivity, improved end user experience perspective, we had an organization that was taking around 2 weeks sometimes to onboard staff. So, you join an organization that takes you 2 weeks to become productive and have the access you need to do your job. It's not efficient, it's not productive, and you as a new start into the organization have a pretty poor perception and experience of joining the organization. By identifying that issue, looking to then automate the identity lifecycle management process around joiners, you've then got people that are active and productive on day one. So you're reducing the costs of manual provisioning, and then you're increasing that end user experience productivity, the fact that they're productive from day one and they've got a good feeling of joining a well-run organization. If I then look back at compliance and security, we deal with a lot of highly regulated financial services organizations. One of them came to us and they were having real problems with the amount of time it was taking to demonstrate compliance to external auditors. So we went into those guys and we onboarded their critical applications that were involved in these external audits. And because they then gained that visibility with a system that was then able to bubble up to the surface, the key risks and the audit trail for the past year of the decisions that were made by who and when and why people had appropriate access, they reduced the time to actually comply with external audits by 50%. So there was increased security compliance, but also more efficiency in their audit processes. So, I mean, those are some really key use cases and success stories.
They're really clear, aren't they? Really transparent when you do that. Not to mention the psychological benefit. We all remember that first day. We all remember that last day. It's kind of like with school. You remember it. And if it's a negative experience or it's a little bit clunky, it lingers, particularly if your colleagues are having a great time on their first day and you're doing documentation, or it's just not a great experience. So, talking about that kind of first impressions and when things like that. So you've got that. And then how do you then go about building on that to do additional work, additional projects, because you're feeling more confident there because you're actually showing the value. But then there's other parts of the organization that also need to have some of these applications.
Yeah, so I think you'll always have your sort of almost phase zero, which is your foundation. We do that with an accelerator package, which kind of gets you up to speed within 12 weeks and shows that value. But then on top of that, we also have something called Identity Process Plus. And that's a framework looking at identity governance all the way from business case to then cover all the horizontals and verticals of identity governance. And the reason that we have it in that way is I get asked quite a lot, what's a common identity governance journey for an organization? And it really depends on the priority for the organization. If the driver is efficiency, it will be onboarding more systems and it'll be automating more systems, maybe starting to implement role-based access control. If it's compliance and security, it might be a case of classifying their data, taking a risk-based approach to things, defining violation management like toxic combinations, SODs. But that foundation that you have there, you've demonstrated value early, and then you're able to then build on that and have a continuous value journey as you continue to mature in each of the pieces that align with what the priorities are for that organization.
Brilliant, because everyone likes that roadmap, but if they can start to see some value quickly, the buy-in is there, the rest of the business is looking around, and that discretionary effort to go a little bit further is there. And you mentioned that kind of mid to kind of large organizations where things are complicated. So being able to build that trust initially and show those use cases is very, very powerful. Where are you seeing the trends? What are you seeing? And again, this could be a separate episode by itself, if not multiple episodes, but what are you seeing currently that's impacting your customers and you're speaking about?
So if we're looking at current trends in terms of the challenges we're trying to solve today, I think a large part of it is trying to modernize their cyber and their identity governance stack. So we're seeing a lot of legacy solutions that are on-premise. I think legacy and on-premise are very separate things. When you start talking about legacy applications, that to me is something that's no longer fit for purpose, you're looking to replace. Whereas people talk about legacy systems sometimes just because it's on-prem, and that's just, it's just, there's a big distinction there. But I think modernizing that platform to go on digital transformation or cloud journeys that are people on, we're seeing that a lot. There's some legacy identity governance solutions out there that have stated that they're going out of support. You've got MIM, SAP IGA, Oracle Identity Manager, to name a few. And then also people have got in-house or homegrown solutions as well. So trying to replace that so that they're then able to take advantage of the innovation that you're able to do in the cloud. So you're able to then use generic connectivity protocols, like SOAP, REST, SCIM, OData to connect to the growing number of cloud applications that organizations are using. So that's one of the core drivers. And, you know, even though we've been around for a long time, we speak to organizations that have been doing it for some time, so it's a case of replacing and then helping them grow. There's some organizations we're speaking to that have maybe grown rapidly, they've been doing it manually. So it's a case of taking them on that journey. So, I mean, that modernization journey, that modernization trend is still something that we're massively seeing. And then in terms of future, I'm not going to go into it too much, but AI is starting to come in more and more to the conversations for sure, as well as the concept of the identity fabric. So that's where, I mean, where the latter, the identity fabric, so our sort of security ecosystem, we're seeing the need for a simplified integration with adjacent technologies like PAM, DAG, identity providers, UEBA, and that interoperability needs to be better. And that's a trend that we are seeing now, and it will become more and more important.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I would love to deep dive into that, but we promised our listeners around 20 minutes. But it's what you'd say, and we kind of talked about that AI aspect. Suddenly, with last week with the AI EU Act getting ratified, in the next 18 months, it would be law. With AI being so dependent with cybersecurity and that kind of mixed together, suddenly you've got a legislative perspective that you need to adhere to and manage, and how you look at that as well. So things start to become more complicated to stay ahead of it as well. Craig, we'll definitely have you back on the show to go into more detail. I know we're going to have additional questions that popped up. You've been listening to the Alldus podcast, and I've been speaking with Craig Ramsay. Craig is a senior solution architect at Omada, and we've been talking about identity and identity governance among a few different options. Thank you very much for your time, Craig.
Thanks for having me, Mark, and looking forward to talking to you again.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.